The rain slammed against the glass walls of my father's lakeside villa. But the real storm was inside that dining room. I sat there, 34 years old, but feeling 10 again. Small, invisible, desperately holding my breath. Across the polished oak table, my father slid a heavy envelope toward my younger brother, Derek. "Congratulations, son," he said, pride gleaming in his voice. "You've earned it. The villa. The company. The offshore accounts. All of it, handed over with the stroke of a pen." I stared at the envelope. At Derek's hand trembling slightly as he picked it up. At Margaret, my stepmother, who refused to meet my eyes, fingers twisting her diamond necklace in nervous circles. And then my father turned to me. His face hardened, his voice like ice. "And you, Emma," he said, almost spitting the words. "You've always been a dreamer. Too soft. Too weak to survive in the real world." I felt my stomach drop, my palms slick against my slacks. There were 4 people in that room. But somehow, I had never felt more alone. I opened my mouth, tried to speak, tried to say, "Please don't do this." But the words came out as a whisper. My father rolled his eyes. "Spare me," he snapped. "You chose to walk away, remember? You wanted to find your purpose in some clinic overseas. You chose to leave this family." "No." I wanted to scream. "You never asked why I left. You never cared." But I didn't say that. I just sat there, frozen in the moment I was being erased. Across the table, Derek shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Even he, the golden child, seemed to understand that something about this was wrong. But no one said a word. The attorney, Mr. Grayson, cleared his throat awkwardly. The rain softened outside, almost like even the storm was waiting to hear what came next. I realized then. Family loyalty is a beautiful illusion. But sometimes the people you love most are the ones who cut the deepest. And when that happens, when the foundation you trusted crumbles under your feet, you only have 2 choices. Crumble with it, or build something stronger from the ashes. That night, sitting there in that cold, heavy silence, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not let this moment define me. I would not be erased. Because sometimes losing everything you thought you needed is the only way you finally find out who you were meant to be. People see the mansions, the crisp suits, the carefully curated photos on holiday cards, and they assume success means happiness. But what most don't realize is that success often builds the perfect hiding place for the deepest wounds. My father, Charles Callahan, wore his achievements like armor. He built Harborcrest Holdings from the ground up. He was the man everyone admired, the pillar of power at every gala, the headline story at every charity ball. And growing up, I wanted nothing more than to make him proud. But in a house filled with awards and accolades, love wasn't something freely given. It had to be earned. And even then, it always felt just out of reach. Success wasn't something we celebrated. It was the bare minimum. And failure. Well, failure wasn't tolerated at all. "Maybe if you were more like Derek," he'd say, shaking his head when I brought home my projects from the shelter. "You'll never survive if you keep wasting time on things that don't pay." He never needed to yell. He didn't have to raise his voice. The silence that followed every disappointment was punishment enough. The truth is, emotional abuse doesn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it leaves questions. Am I enough? Am I worthy? Will I ever be what they want? And when you grow up equating love with achievement, you start chasing success not because you love it, but because you're desperate to be loved. It took me years to realize. Real love doesn't demand that you shrink. Real love doesn't measure your worth in titles, or paychecks, or how perfectly you fit the mold. Real love sees you, messy, brilliant, human, and chooses you anyway. And sometimes the most dangerous families aren't the ones who yell and rage. They're the ones who stay perfectly composed while carving you hollow inside. I spent so long trying to win a race that had no finish line. Trying to prove I was good enough, strong enough, smart enough. But the truth was, no matter how many degrees I earned, how many shelters I helped build, how many awards I could stack on a shelf, I would never be the daughter my father wanted. Because what he wanted wasn't a daughter. It was a reflection. And I refused to become someone else's mirror. That realization hurt. It broke something deep inside me. But it also set me free. Because sometimes, the family you lose is the family you were never truly safe with in the first place. And just as I thought I was utterly alone, an unexpected hand reached across the years. One final move made in silence, love, and faith. The hand of someone who had always seen the real me. Someone who believed in me even when I struggled to believe in myself. And that changed everything. Sometimes, the strongest revolutions don't come with shouting. They come in the quiet moments, in the hidden places, where love writes itself into the future without needing permission. As I sat there at the oak table, feeling invisible, I almost missed the shift. The small cough from Mr. Grayson, the family attorney, as he hesitated with the folder still in his hands. "There's one more thing," he said carefully, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. My father stiffened. Derek frowned. Margaret's hands gripped her necklace tighter. Mr. Grayson unfolded a document, yellowed slightly with time. "A sealed amendment," he said, glancing at me, "filed 6 years ago at the request of Eleanor Whitmore." My breath caught. Grandma. The one who used to tuck notes of encouragement into my school lunches. The one who sat through my endless stories about the shelter, listening as if every word mattered. The one who once whispered into my ear, "Emma, your strength is quiet, but it is unbreakable." The room felt like it held its breath with me as Mr. Grayson began to read. "In the event that my granddaughter Emma Callahan is deemed unworthy by her father, I hereby transfer full authority over my share of Harborcrest Holdings to her, effective immediately. All voting rights, all decision-making power, shall be hers to exercise without interference." For a long moment, no one moved. Even the storm outside seemed to soften, as if nature itself was waiting. My father's face turned a deep, mottled red. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, voice trembling. "She has no idea how to run a company." I looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something he would never understand. Grace. Maybe I didn't know how to play the games he played. Maybe I wasn't born to manipulate, to dominate, to crush opposition. But I knew how to lead. I knew how to protect. I knew how to build something better. And for the first time, I realized that someone else had known it too. Long before I ever did. Grandma. She had seen this moment coming. And she had chosen to believe in me even when my own father refused. Real-life reflection. The most powerful support often comes quietly. Not with grand gestures. Not with headlines. But with steady, unwavering faith when you need it most. I stood up slowly, my palms flat against the cool wood of the table. "I may not have been your choice," I said calmly, meeting my father's stunned gaze. "But I am the right choice." Mr. Grayson nodded slightly, offering me the documents. The next chapter of my life, one I never asked for, one I never thought I could claim, was already unfolding. And deep inside, I promised myself, I wouldn't just survive this. I would honor the faith someone brave enough to love quietly had placed in me. Because when the world tries to silence you, the greatest rebellion is to stand tall anyway. Not with anger, but with purpose. As I reached for the pen to sign the acknowledgement, I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt ready. Because sometimes the fiercest legacies are written in whispers, not in shouts. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I signed my name with a hand that looked steady but trembled just enough that I noticed. In that moment, the title transferred. The company, the shares, the voting rights. All of it now sat on my shoulders. But if anyone thought I felt triumphant, they were wrong. The truth was, I felt hollow. Not because I didn't believe I could do it, but because I understood exactly what it meant. This wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a prize. It was responsibility. It was decades of expectations, resentment, fear, and broken relationships, all bundled into a neat pile of paperwork. I glanced across the room. My father, Charles, stood near the window, looking out but seeing nothing. Derek sat stiffly, a muscle ticking in his jaw. Margaret twisted her wedding band around and around on her finger, the silence stretching thick between us. No one congratulated me. No one smiled. Because in their minds, I hadn't won. I had disrupted the natural order they had counted on all along. Power, when you aren't born craving it, feels strange in your hands. It feels sharp around the edges. It hums with a kind of weight that no amount of preparation truly teaches you to carry. Driving away from the villa, the rain blurred the windshield, turning the lights of Harborcrest Holdings into a hazy glow in the distance. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. This wasn't the life I had imagined for myself. I had dreamed of quiet victories, of work that healed people, not power struggles that hollowed them out. But maybe, just maybe, this was where I was meant to be all along. Not because I craved control, but because I understood the price of losing it. I didn't know how to play their games, but I knew how to stand in my truth. And that, I promised myself, would be enough. What I didn't realize was that stepping into power didn't just make you a leader. It made you a target. And the first shot was already loaded, aimed by someone I once trusted more than anyone. You always think betrayal will come from strangers. It's easier that way. Cleaner. But the deepest cuts, the ones you never quite see coming, they're delivered by the hands you once trusted most. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Derek wasn't just angry. He wasn't just hurt. He was furious in a way that simmered beneath polished smiles and civil small talk. At first, it was little things. Meetings scheduled without me. Documents that mysteriously went missing. Whispers that spread through the halls like smoke. She doesn't have the experience. She's just here because of her grandmother's pity. She's going to ruin everything. And the hardest part? Some of it came from people I had once called family. I saw the looks at company events. The quiet, polite smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. The way conversations would shift when I walked into a room. For years, Derek had been groomed for this. The next CEO. The golden boy. And now, here I was, holding what he believed should have been his by right. No matter how many times I tried to bridge the gap, no matter how many invitations I extended, he met every olive branch with a sword. "You're not built for this world, Emma," he said once, cornering me outside a boardroom. "You think kindness will save you? You think compassion is strength? This isn't a charity. It's a battlefield." I stood there, letting his words fall around me like rain. Not because they didn't hurt. They did. But because I knew that fighting back the way he wanted, with anger, with venom, would make me lose myself faster than any defeat could. He didn't see it, but he was wrong about one thing. I knew exactly what battlefields looked like. I just believed in fighting a different kind of war. Real-life truth. Sometimes the people closest to you will challenge your right to grow. Not because you're wrong, but because your growth threatens the story they've told themselves about their own worth. I wasn't there to beat Derek. I wasn't there to punish him. I was there to rebuild what our family had forgotten. That real leadership doesn't crush. It lifts. That real strength isn't measured in who you can conquer, but in who you can carry with you. But Derek didn't want to be carried. He wanted to win. At any cost. And soon, I would find out just how far he was willing to go. Because when blood turns against blood, the wounds aren't just personal. They're public. And Derek's next move wasn't just designed to hurt me. It was designed to destroy me. The first headline hit on a Thursday morning. New CEO Emma Callahan accused of charity fraud. I blinked at the glowing screen, not fully processing the words. Not at first. Then came the emails. The panicked phone calls from board members. The media inquiries piling up faster than I could answer them. It didn't matter that the accusations were false. It didn't matter that there was no evidence. In today's world, the truth doesn't run as fast as a juicy lie. By the time I stepped into the office, the damage was already done. The receptionist couldn't meet my eyes. 2 assistants whispered behind their hands. Even Maria, the steady rock in my storm, looked at me with quiet, aching sadness. I closed the door to my office and leaned against it for a moment. Letting the weight settle. I knew where this came from. I didn't even have to wonder. Derek had launched the first real strike. And it was perfectly calculated. Not to beat me in the boardroom. Not to outmaneuver me with legal contracts. But to destroy the one thing I needed most in this new role. Credibility. False accusations don't just question your decisions. They question your character. And once that doubt seeps in, it's almost impossible to wipe it away completely. I sat at my desk and opened the anonymous files being sent around. Screenshots taken out of context. Emails twisted into something ugly. Photos cropped and edited to tell a story that wasn't true. And in the center of it all, me. The girl who didn't deserve to lead. The girl who was too soft, too naive, too emotional. The girl who had no right to sit at the head of the table. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I forced myself to stay still. Not here. Not now. Instead, I opened my laptop and did what I had always done best. I started gathering the truth. Financial records. Project reports. Testimonies from the shelters and housing programs I had helped build. For every lie, I had a mountain of evidence ready to stand against it. But deep down, I knew. No matter how clear the facts were, some people would only ever see the story they wanted to believe. That night, long after the office had emptied, I sat curled on the worn couch in the corner of my office. The soft hum of the city outside the window. The lonely buzz of the fluorescent lights. And finally, when no one could see, I let the tears fall. Not because I believed what they said, but because somewhere deep inside, a small voice still whispered, "What if they're right? What if you really aren't strong enough for this?" I buried my face in my hands, trying to silence the doubt, the fear, the crushing loneliness. And that's when I heard it. A soft knock at the door. I wiped my eyes quickly, straightened my shoulders, and called out, "Come in." The door creaked open, and Maria stepped inside, holding a paper cup of coffee in both hands. "You looked like you needed this," she said, her voice kind. I took the cup, my fingers brushing hers. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice rough. She sat down across from me, no judgment in her eyes, no pity either, just quiet understanding. "I've been here a long time," Maria said. "I've seen people rise and fall in this company. But you're different." I shook my head, bitter laughter rising. "Different doesn't seem to be helping me much." She leaned forward slightly. "That's because you're fighting a war they don't know how to win. They think power comes from fear. You're showing them it can come from something else." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't losing. Maybe I was just fighting a battle that took longer to win. The battle to change not just a company, but the way people believed leadership could look. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, letting the heat steady me. Tomorrow, the headlines would still be there. The whispers would still swirl. But I would be there too. Still standing. Still fighting. Still believing. Because no lie, no smear, no campaign of fear could erase the truth I knew in my bones. I didn't come here to survive. I came here to lead. And I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, I woke with a different kind of heaviness in my chest. Not fear. Not despair. Determination. I walked into Harborcrest Holdings not like a woman on trial, but like a leader with a truth too strong to be broken by rumors. Still, it felt lonely. Every step through the marble corridors echoed louder than usual. Every polite nod from colleagues seemed a little too forced, a little too careful. Until I reached the break room. I had gone there, foolishly, for a moment of quiet. Instead, I found silence of another kind. The second I walked in, the chatter died. Cups froze halfway to mouths. Newspapers rustled awkwardly. For a moment, I thought about turning around. Pretending I hadn't seen, hadn't heard. But Maria's voice from the night before lingered in my mind. Fight the war they don't know how to win. So I smiled gently, lifted my coffee cup in greeting, and said, "Please, don't let me interrupt your break. You deserve to sit, relax, and feel safe here." It was such a simple thing. And yet, the room shifted. Slowly, chairs scraped back. Conversations resumed, quietly at first, then stronger. A woman from accounting, Elena, I remembered her name, stood up and crossed the room. "Miss Callahan," she said, voice nervous but steady. "If you need anything. If you need someone to help, we're here." Behind her, others nodded. Not many. Not loudly. But enough. Enough to remind me that not everyone was rooting for my downfall. Enough to remind me that loyalty, the real kind, can't be demanded. It has to be earned. And sometimes, it comes from the places you least expect. Fear-based loyalty crumbles at the first sign of trouble. But loyalty built on respect, on kindness, on shared values, that kind endures. That day, I made a choice. Instead of hunting down traitors, instead of trying to silence critics, I started investing in the people who still believed. I listened. I walked the floors. I asked real questions and stayed for the real answers. Slowly, steadily, the tide began to turn. Not because I was louder. Not because I was more ruthless. But because people were tired of fear. They were tired of walking on eggshells. They were tired of pretending the company was a kingdom. They were ready for something better. For someone who saw them. Someone who fought for them, not against them. The smear campaigns didn't disappear overnight. The doubts didn't vanish with a few kind words. But seeds were planted. And roots were taking hold. Because respect isn't commanded. It's cultivated. And sometimes the strongest allies aren't the ones who shout your name from rooftops. They're the ones who show up quietly. Day after day. When it matters most. As I sat at my desk later that night, sifting through a stack of project proposals left anonymously on my chair, I realized something simple, but powerful. The empire they built on fear was starting to crumble. And in its place, brick by brick, we were building something stronger. Something human. But Derek wasn't done fighting. And his next move would make everything I'd worked for tremble. The summons came on a gray Monday morning. A special session of the board. No agenda. No formal notes. Just a location, a time, and a clear message between the lines. It was a trial. And I was the one on the stand. I straightened my jacket in the mirror before walking into the conference room. Not to impress them. Not to hide my nerves. But to remind myself who I was fighting for. Not just myself. Not just my grandmother's memory. But for every employee who deserved a company built on something more than fear. The boardroom smelled of fresh coffee and tension. The long polished table gleamed under the overhead lights. Around it sat the same faces who once called me idealistic, who once whispered that I was too soft. Now, they looked at me with something colder. Suspicion. At the head of the table sat Mr. Caldwell, a founding board member, tapping a pen against his notepad. Beside him, several others shuffled papers, whispering in hushed tones. I stood alone at the other end of the room. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat. Miss Callahan, in light of recent allegations against your leadership, the board has concerns about your ability to continue as CEO. I didn't flinch. Didn't rush to defend myself. Didn't match their suspicion with anger. Instead, I pulled a slim black folder from my bag and placed it carefully on the table. If I may, I said, keeping my voice calm, steady. I'd like to present some evidence first. They leaned forward. Skeptical. Hungry. I clicked the remote in my hand. The screen behind me lit up, not with speeches, not with emotional pleas, but with facts. Financial audits. Emails confirming project completions. Testimonies from independent auditors, nonprofits, and community leaders. Slide after slide. Cold. Hard. Undeniable. I watched their faces shift, not with delight, but with something more reluctant. Recognition. Then I delivered the final blow. Footage. Security camera recordings from the data breach. A figure, Derek, entering restricted offices late at night. Plugging in a USB drive. Transferring files. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the fabricated documents leaked to the press. There it was. Not anger. Not vengeance. Truth. In moments of attack, it's tempting to yell, to rage, to fight fire with fire. But fire consumes. Facts endure. The room stayed silent as the footage ended. No one spoke. Finally, Mr. Caldwell removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Do you have anything else to add, Miss Callahan?" he asked, voice quieter now. I shook my head gently. "I'm not here to destroy anyone," I said simply. "I'm here to lead. With integrity. With transparency. With respect for the people who built this company from the ground up." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if anyone would speak at all. And then, Mr. Caldwell stood. "I'll be honest," he said, looking around the room. "I doubted you. I thought you were just another dreamer." He smiled, small, genuine. "But today, you reminded me of something we lost a long time ago." One by one, the board members nodded. Reluctantly. Quietly. But they nodded. I didn't smile. Not yet. Because I knew. This wasn't a victory parade. It was the first real step on a long road. Derek hadn't returned to the office. His seat sat conspicuously empty. But the shadow he cast over Harborcrest still lingered. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't standing alone. And I wasn't standing in anger. I was standing in truth. And truth, when wielded calmly, without apology, is stronger than any sword. The weeks after the board meeting passed in a blur. News outlets quietly retracted the false stories. The whispers in the hallways grew fewer, softer. The people who had once looked at me with suspicion began to meet my gaze with something else. Respect. The storm was easing. But one voice remained silent. Charles Callahan, my father. No calls. No messages. No cryptic emails from lawyers. Nothing. And honestly, part of me was grateful. The wounds he left behind had scabbed over into something I could live with. I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need his validation to stand tall. Or so I thought. One quiet Sunday morning, I unlocked my office door, coffee in hand, ready to get a few hours of work done. And there he was. Sitting in one of the guest chairs, hands folded in his lap. Looking smaller than I had ever seen him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I had to see it for myself," he said, voice rough. "Had to see if you really didn't burn it all down." I leaned against the doorframe, uncertain. He wasn't the powerful man I remembered. He wasn't the untouchable patriarch who used to fill every room. He looked tired. Older. Human. "You didn't," he continued after a beat. "You built something better." I said nothing. I let him sit with the weight of his own words. "I was wrong about you," he said finally, voice cracking just slightly. "I was wrong about a lot of things." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photo. A snapshot from years ago. Me, maybe 12 years old, paint smeared on my jeans. My grandmother Eleanor kneeling beside me, laughing at something only the two of us knew. He set the photo gently on my desk. "She saw it first," he said quietly. "I was too proud. Too angry. I couldn't see it." I swallowed hard, the old ache stirring in my chest. "You don't have to say anything," he added, almost a whisper. "I just needed you to know. I'm sorry, Emma." It would have been easy to stay silent. To let the apology hang there, empty and unresolved. But healing doesn't happen by clinging to anger. It happens when someone finally lays down their weapons. And someone else is brave enough to meet them halfway. I crossed the room, picking up the photo, tracing the edges of it with my thumb. "Thank you," I said simply. He nodded. A slight, almost imperceptible dip of his head. Then, without another word, he stood and walked out. No promises. No grand gestures. Just a man finally realizing that power wasn't the legacy worth leaving behind. Love was. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for him to start learning that. I sat down behind my desk, the photo of my younger self and my grandmother propped carefully against the lamp. Outside the window, the sun was breaking through the clouds. A new beginning. Quiet and small. But real. And as I watched the light stretch across the floor, I knew. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strongest, bravest thing we can ever choose. In the months that followed, Harborcrest Holdings changed. Not with loud proclamations or sweeping headlines, but with a quiet shift you could feel in the hallways, in the break rooms, in the way people spoke to each other. We didn't become flashier. We became stronger. Because true transformation doesn't start with new logos or clever mission statements. It starts with how people feel when they walk through the door each morning. We rebuilt departments based on trust, not politics. We offered second chances to voices that had once been silenced. We created programs that invested back into our communities, not just our shareholders. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the company I had inherited under the weight of resentment became something closer to what my grandmother had dreamed of. A place built not on fear, but on hope. There were losses along the way. Some employees left, unable or unwilling to adapt to a culture where kindness wasn't seen as weakness but as strength. Some investors balked at the slower, steadier growth. But the ones who stayed, they stayed because they believed. And that made all the difference. One afternoon, Maria stopped by my office with a list in hand. Names of employees my father had let go without cause. Names I had personally invited back. Many of them returned. Some didn't. And that was okay. Because rebuilding isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing a better future, even when it costs you something. Real-life truth. Legacies aren't built in the corner offices or the grand boardrooms. They're built in the small moments. In the way you treat the receptionist when you're late for a meeting. In the way you fight for the intern who's too afraid to speak up. In the way you choose compassion when anger would be easier. Today, when I walk through the halls of Harborcrest, I don't hear whispers of doubt. I hear footsteps. Steady, confident, hopeful. I hear people who believe in the future we're building together. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my office, I pull out the small, gold-plated compass my grandmother left me. I hold it in my hand and remind myself, true leadership isn't about the power you hold. It's about the light you leave behind. If you asked me years ago what victory would have looked like, I might have said winning my father's approval, or beating Derek at his own game. But now I know the truth. Victory isn't about revenge. It's about respect. Respect for yourself. Respect for the people you serve. Respect for the journey it takes to become someone you're proud of. Today, my father and I don't see each other often. But once, a few months ago, I received an anonymous donation receipt. A 7-figure gift made in my name to the very shelter where I once found my purpose. No note. No signature. Just a quiet gesture from a man learning, finally, that true power comes not from control, but from letting go. And as for Derek? We met once, over coffee, in a small cafe far from the towering buildings and old rivalries. There were no grand apologies. No dramatic reconciliations. Just two siblings, sharing a table, slowly stitching something resembling peace between them. Sometimes, healing doesn't come wrapped in dramatic speeches or tearful reunions. Sometimes, it comes in quiet understanding. In forgiveness offered without fanfare. In the decision to move forward, together or apart, with grace. And now, when I step into the future, I don't carry the burden of proving myself anymore. I carry something far more powerful. The certainty that you don't have to become what tried to break you. You can build something better. You can leave a legacy of light. All you have to do is choose it. Sometimes, life's greatest battles aren't fought with fists or grand speeches. They're fought quietly, with resilience, integrity, and compassion. Emma's journey reminds us that true leadership isn't about overpowering others, but about uplifting them. Personally, I believe the most powerful legacies are built not on wealth or titles, but on kindness, respect, and the courage to stay true to who you are. No matter how loud the world's doubts may be, your quiet strength can still change everything. If this story moved you the way it moved me, please like this video, leave a comment sharing your favorite lesson. And don't forget to subscribe for more real, inspiring stories. Let's build a community where healing, strength, and authenticity are celebrated, one story at a time. Because sometimes, the quietest voices leave the loudest echoes.